Hello, 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 hello. Old school comic book appreciation. Let's look at Black Panther by Jack Kirby. This is volume one. This reprints issues 1 through 7, written and drawn by Jack Kirby back in the mid 70s. For people who don't know, I think most people are probably familiar with the Black Panther. Black Panther was created back in the early mid 60s by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby in the Fantastic Four, and he was pretty much world's first black superhero. Jack Kirby, some people might not be familiar with, um, is somebody who's been around since the well, he's not with us anymore, but Jack Kirby was there during the golden age in comics back in the 40s, and he pretty much helped shape and help create the language that he did along with a lot of other people too at the time, but pretty much is responsible for the language that people use for decades as far as telling a story in comic book form, as far as how pages and panels are laid out, and how do you get from point A to point B, how stories are paced, and so on and so forth. And he definitely set the tone or I say the tone for, modern superhero comics, or at least how they were up until, very, very, very recently. Um, the comparison I would make would be, Jack Kirby is to superhero comics what Chuck Berry was to rock and roll. A guy like, Kurt Hammett in the 80s, of course, doesn't sound anything like, Chuck Berry did. On the other hand, you can't get to Kurt Hammett in Metallica if you didn't have Chuck Berry back in the late 50s. So anyway, this particular story is very, I would say it is very influenced by. Oh, another thing about Jack Kirby, just to talk about his art for a minute. Jack Kirby's art style is really, even though he pretty much set the pace for modern superhero comics, or we'll say Silver Age superhero comics. The way his drawing got, especially during the 70s and the 80s, his art got more and more, I don't want to say abstract. It didn't get abstract, but his characters got bigger and bulkier and blockier. All of his women were really thick. All of his men were thick and jagged looking, big heavy lines and things, and it was almost cartoony in a way in comparison to other people who had more realistic styles. You look at comics that were coming out at that time by somebody like Neil Adams or John Buscema, or how those guys used to look when they were inked by Tom Palmer, that stuff looked, pretty realistic next to Jack Kirby's big, bulky characters and things like that, and his strange, twisted anatomy, But that's all right, Jack Kirby he's the guy. His nickname was the King. Anyway, getting to these stories, I just mentioned it because it might be off-putting if you're used to a more realistic type of style, but if you've got an open mind, I think you definitely appreciate it. Anyway, getting back to the story. The story here is very Indiana Jones-ish, which is kind of interesting because I think these stories came out maybe a year or two before the first Raiders of the Lost Ark story came out. I think the original comics were published in either 1977 or 78, and I think Raiders of the Lost Ark might have come out in 78 or 79. Somebody help me out if I'm wrong on that, but I think that's how it goes. The plot has something to do with the Black Panthers teamed up with this little man named Abner Abner Little, and there's another woman called Princess Xanda, and they are collectors, and basically they're wealthy people who go around collecting rare artifacts and rare treasures and things like that, and they somehow coerce the Black Panther into going along with them on their crazy schemes and things like that. The first story arc has to do with something called King Solomon's Frog, and basically the way it's drawn at first, you think, oh, okay, it looks like a golden frog. That's why they get it. It's precious metal. But a few pages in, you discover it's a time machine, and this time machine is responsible for the Loch Ness monster and the legends of the genies and things like that. At one point, somebody shoots the frog, and what happens? Some dude from the future comes out, a big, weird, mutant-looking guy with Hatch 22 written across his forehead, and a disintegrator beam that comes from the back of his head. I mean, hey, you just gotta love it. It's the 70s. The way the stories are written. Well, let's get to this. Jack Kirby was the man. He was an innovator. Nobody could match his imagination as far as coming out with crazy way out ideas and far out concepts in his crazy visual imagination. Jack Kirby was second to none. On the downside, dialogue was not Jack Kirby's strong point. I mean, the dialogue and the captions, the script is extremely wooden, stiff, and clunky. And I mean that not just in comparison to like comics you read to now. It's stiff and wooden and clunky next to stuff you would have stuff you would have read, I should say, back back in 1976. It's full of stuff like here, let me open it up here. You can't escape the power of Princess Xanda. Defiance is fruitless. You will only earn another jolt to your nerves. It's full of stuff like that, Mindless creatures, you have removed me from the hatch. I must return to the hatch. I mean, there's stuff like that on every page, and everybody speaks like that. So, buyer beware. You know what? I shouldn't even say that because I want people to check it out. Just go in it with that in mind. You're not gonna have people speaking in natural dialogue, but still, I would encourage anybody that likes the new Black Panther comics. Check out this classic stuff from back in the day. If you've ever heard of Jack Kirby, give it a look. Even though this is not Jack Kirby at his A game. I know at that particular time he's doing lots of different stuff for Marvel. He was, at the same time he was doing this, he was doing Captain America. He was doing a comic book based on the movie 2001, which eventually became Machine Man. He was doing something called Devil Dinosaur and Cave Boy. He was doing the Eternals, and then he was drawing a lot of the covers for different comics. So he had a lot on his plate, so this probably didn't get, as much as attention as it could have from Jack. But still, it's still a great read. The inking is done by Mike Royer, who was his main inker at that particular time. And it's still a joy to look at, Like I said, I recommend this to anybody who's interested in the Black Panther, anybody who's heard of Jack Kirby, and anybody, of course, who's a fan of old school Silver Age 70s comics. Give it a shot. Anybody who's interested in old black superheroes, definitely check it out for its historical value. And that's about it. Please, let me know. Write any comments if you think I left anything out. Rate this review. Tell me where I'm wrong. Tell me if you agree with me. Once again, I got to thank you very much, and you have a great one.